Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. I'm really excited about today's guest, Michael Ceely. He's a mindset coach and mental health professional, and he helps high performing individuals get results far beyond their expectations. He's got a fantastic background in as an athlete, and he's going to talk about sports psychology. I love talking about mindset, especially in the realm of athletics and performance, business, entrepreneurship, and I'm happy to welcome him to the show. Michael, welcome.
Chris, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I know you have an extensive background, so kind of tell people, your story and how you got into the work that you do.
Yeah, so my first career was being a professional athlete. I was a bicycle racer. I did that very seriously from probably age 16 through age 24. Went to the Olympic trials a couple times, got some state championship titles. Really enjoyed that as a career. Was making a little bit of money at it, but not quite enough. So I got quote unquote practical at about age 24 and went to college. Got a degree in Spanish, became a Spanish teacher. Loved the job, didn't quite pay enough, and took that, sort of leveraged that into working in voice recognition technology, kind of in the early days, or late 90s, early 2000s. Enjoyed that quite a bit as well. And then one day at the firm I was working for, we had an organizational psychologist come in and basically give us all the psychological testing and trying to make the organization work better. And that's when I became really fascinated in psychology. I've been interested in psychology as a bike racer as well, always been interested in psychology, but this particular organizational psychologist came in and just really opened my eyes into systems theory and how everything affects everything else, opened my eyes into leadership, the power of like a really strong leader and how that has a huge effect on an organization, and decided to go to grad school and become a psychotherapist, opened up my own practice. I now have 3 practices in 3 different states, all online therapy. More recently, in the last about year and a half, I was getting a lot of clients who were athletes because I'm an athlete as well. And we were doing work together in psychotherapy. And then they got to the point where they're like, hey, can you coach me in my sport? I said, sure. So, leveraging some of the principles I learned in psychotherapy, turning that more into a performance-based program. And so opened up my own business, michaelceely.com, which is just pure coaching. So part of my business is more of the repair work, traditional psychotherapy, and the other part is people who really who are ready to progress to the next level. So I implement, again, a lot of the principles of psychotherapy, holistic look at the person, at the performer. So if you're an entrepreneur or an athlete or anybody aspiring to do something new and challenging in your life, there's a lot of things. If you're just trained in coaching, there are things you can overlook that I think that psychotherapy brings in, some kind of fills in the gaps there. So that's basically my story. I love psychology. It's like a puzzle. When someone presents a problem to me, I just love it. Sometimes, it takes a while to figure out, but I've seen enough patterns where I'm like, all right, this is juicy. Let's dive in and let's fix this. So that's basically me.
Yeah, it's good. I love that. I competed as an amateur, but talk about, some people on the podcast are listening. They're like, oh, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a businessman. How does sport psychology apply? How can it help entrepreneurs, better performance, executive thinking, all of that?
Yeah. Well, in a lot of ways, if you're an entrepreneur, you're an athlete. It's very, very difficult, very challenging, and you picked it for a reason. So you have a type of personality that likes challenges, and you really want to grow. And so a lot of my work with athletes is very similar to entrepreneurs in that they're trying to achieve something that maybe they don't even know that they can achieve, and it's very daunting. But again, they have this personality that really likes to rise to the occasion. And in that, there's any kind of strength can also be a weakness too. So if you're super motivated and really grinding all the time, that can lead to burnout, right? Mm-hmm. If you are very independent and headstrong and strong-willed, that's great, but then you maybe don't network enough, right? And this applies to athletes too, because a lot of athletes will have a great career, then afterwards they're kind of lost, right? So I look at, when I work with athletes and entrepreneurs, it's like this long game, right? You're in it for the long haul. right? And you're going to have wins and losses, and the graph is going upward, but there's these little ticks up and down in the graph. And when they go down, how do you deal with that? Do you deal with that in very frustrated? Do you feel like giving up, which, by the way, is pretty normal? But the more of these dips you have, and you've probably seen this in your business life as well, that, if you keep plugging away, things will go up again, right? So really, again, athletes and entrepreneurs have the same mindset, and they're also prone to the same pitfalls based on their strength of being a determined winner, right? So they don't like losing. But if they, take it personally, if you take losing personally, that can be a problem too. And then again, burnout is another one. There's a couple other things too, where, you're not taking care of your health. You have to have good health. So I'm a big fan of having routines, non-negotiable routines in your life, getting plenty of exercise, limiting alcohol use, taking vacations. All of these things are, again, for that long game. If you want to win in the long term, you have to set yourself up for success. So,
yeah, I love that. And, a lot of my colleagues, they were surgeons or, or executives or even entrepreneurs, and a lot of them were athletes, and kind of how you talked about, sports psychology. There's also this idea of this myth of balance in high performance. So talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I think balance is very personal. I do believe in balance, but when you hear this sort of preaching of balance by people on YouTube or whatever, right? It's more of like, I must have a prescribed amount of balance just like everybody else. I should take 2 weeks of vacation per year. I should take at least one day off a week. All of these things that you quote unquote should do. And the clients I work with, we find, what is your personal balance? Like, what is it that's going to, at the very least, keep you from burning out, right? You have to have that built in there. Like a race car going around a track comes in for pit stops. If you don't come in for pit stops, you're going to lose the race. So I, pitch it that way, because entrepreneurs, athletes, they're very hard on themselves. They're very critical, and they really push themselves. So it's really about balance. What does that mean to you? So I would say, Chris, what does balance mean to you? And you might say, I like working every day of the week. I'm like, great. What's the one day where you work a little bit less, right? So that you have this natural sort of cycle to your week, natural rhythm. I don't spend enough time with my kids. Like my brother spends a lot of time with his kids, and I feel guilty. Like, well, when was the last time you sat down with your spouse and had a conversation about what is the right balance? And so it's a very personal thing, but I do believe in balance, but it has to be personal to the person I'm working with.
And then you also talked about earlier on, you talked about the importance of routines. And so kind of talk about what are some of the positive daily habits, routines you teach your clients, or that you implement, so people can understand more.
Yeah. Well, with athletes, they're probably getting enough exercise, but with entrepreneurs, sometimes that's not a priority, right? So that I'm going to skip the gym today. I have too many meetings, right? Common thing. And it's really, again, it's like these pit stops. Like if you're a race car, you need to stop and get gas and get your windshield washed and all this kind of thing. With anyone I work with, it's really about establishing the routine that works for you, again, for that long game. So that anyone can go probably a week or 2 weeks without exercising and even eating poorly and not getting enough sleep. 2 weeks is kind of the max, and then it really starts to affect your performance. So that I sell it this way. It's like, do you want to win for 2 weeks, or do you want to win for two years or 10 years? If you're on that long track, you do have limits as a human being. Like this is the vehicle, if you will, that you were given. You're not a robot. You have to respect the limits of the human body. So the routines take care of that. And then if you put them on autopilot and make them actually non-negotiable, like I go to the gym at least 3 times a week, no matter what. And I schedule everything around that. So you set these sort of bedrock priorities literally in your calendar, so you can't schedule over them. Okay, here's my family time. Here's this, here's that. And you look at it and you go, okay, if these are happening every single week, I'm good, right? And I respect these because, again, I'm invested in the long game, not the short game, Occasionally you might tweak the schedule, but I would say exercise and time with family, friends, socializing is really essential for human beings. And you need to respect that, get those dialed in, make them automatic. It takes probably about 2 months to get a new habit and a routine automated so it becomes a default. So if people are trying, a new routine, exercise, and they're going to have ups and downs. But once you do it for about 2 months, it gets established. So yeah, again, it's about that. What's the long-term game plan, and what are the routines that are going to facilitate that?
Yeah, I love that. And like again, most of the people I talk to, they have some sort of movement or like yoga or meditation, strength, and kind of postural. The other thing is a lot of people listen to their bodies and either their triggers or kind of situations kind of like get them out of their optimal zone. But then you talk about anxiety and you talk about it as a call to action. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Anyone, again, who's a human being is going to feel anxiety. It's going to happen. You have a limbic system inside of your brain, and you can't take that out. Basically there, and it's from the old days when we were on the African savannah and tigers were chasing us, right? So that if you hear a loud noise or see something on your peripheral vision, you feel this adrenaline instantly, right? And that's good. So we're wired for survival. So I call it an action signal in that human beings are basically, we have a 1.0 model that's based on being a hunter-gatherer, and only in the last, maybe a couple thousand years tops, we've been in quote unquote modern times without a lot of predators after us. So we have to deal with this old model, and the old model is it overreacts to any kind of a danger. So in modern times, you have to step in as the observer of that system and not get caught up in that alarm system. So that if you get triggered, let's say that you lose a big client in your business and you out of the blue, you're surprised. And of course, you're going to be hit with a lot of emotion instantaneously before you can even really think about it rationally. And so in the old days, you'd be stuck with these emotions and you would take action. You would run away, or you would do something, or whatever you do, you take some sort of a physical action. So I call it an action signal based on this old archaic system, so that you, as the observer of the executive of yourself, you can look at this action signal, not call it, oh, I'm incapacitated with anxiety, I have anxiety. It's like, no, there's an action signal that's popped up on my dashboard. I'm feeling all the emotions of it, but what do I want to do about it? And I tell my clients, label that anxiety, label that stimulus. We'll call it a stimulus comes in. Is it actionable in the moment? Meaning, like, is it an emergency? Is literally something on fire when you lose a major client? You might want to send them an email. You might want to follow up on the phone right away. So you might label that stressor, that input, as urgent, actionable. Right? Let's say it's something where you get a complaint from a customer and it's not a huge deal. What you can do is you label that appropriately. You'd say actionable, but due later. So I have my clients literally think about like a label that appears across the screen of your vision of either emergency, actionable quickly, actionable later, or drop it. The challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs, athletes, is rarely do they drop something that's like a stressor, because they like winning, right? They like to conquer problems. So a lot of work I do is just having people identify what to do with the action signal, the feeling of anxiety. What are you going to do about it? Sometimes if you literally write down and clarify, you could just literally say, what is the input? It's this happened. What is my action? Right. And sometimes it's just a small action, like send an email or even just journal or even talk to somebody about it, but always taking some sort of an action. And sometimes that action is just a decision to say, okay, I had a 3-star review. I wanted a 5-star review. I'm going to drop it. I'm not going to do anything about it. So that's what I mean by anxiety is an action signal. You have the power not to get caught up in the anxiety. You have the power to take action. And every time you take an action productively, the anxiety is going to be reduced.
Yeah. I love that. And then the next question is kind of, so it's basically kind of this mindful, intentional approach where you kind of identify the stimulus and the trigger. And then, once you kind of assess that, from a right perspective, then you can take appropriate action as opposed to, kind of just being reactive. The other question I have is, logic, you talk about logical fallacies and why it's important to know them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So if you're working, like, let's say in a company, well, so there's a whole list of logical fallacies. So you can Google them. Like, there's an ad hominem, you attack the man, right? You attack instead of attacking the argument. Bandwagon, all the other businesses, all the other chiropractors in my area are doing this thing. I should too, right? So it's just sort of identifying these very common ways of persuasion, right? And you see this a lot in the news media. You see it in political debates. You can spot them. So again, I tell people, Google logical fallacies, and you go, oh, okay, that's what that politician's doing, or that's what this advertising is doing to me, right? And then if you hear these logical fallacies enough, you start to apply them to yourself and your interpretation of events. So let's say that you're in a meeting and you're the CEO, and you get feedback maybe from one of the people working there, and it's critical toward you, right? And if you take that as an attack on me as a person, take it personally, that's an ad hominem. That's a logical fallacy. And then you would instantly say, well, my employee is wrong. What does he know? He's never built a business, right? So what you need to do is listen to the logic. Like, where's the logic in this statement from this employee that's criticizing my business decision, right? And a lot of times what you can do when you have, I'll call it again, like a stressor or an input, is ask another question, right? What is this about? What can I learn from this? Where's the logic in this? So yeah, Google logical fallacies, study a little stoicism also. These things are great. They're kind of old school things, and they really help you when the stress is really turned up. Yeah,
I love that. So kind of, as we kind of come to the close, kind of talk about, lessons you learned, how people can apply this, and how people, like, everybody should have coaches. And you actually remind me of the billionaire coach on Wendy Rhodes on the show, helping people make really good decisions. So how can people contact you, follow you, as we close this out?
It's you've probably seen this in your business. Having a coach, even just a couple of sessions, can really help with getting a lot of clarity. So I think it's good for everyone to try. If people want to work with me as a coach, it's michaelceely.com. My last name is spelled Ceely. You just Google my name, Michael Ceely. All my info pops up on the web. I'm on all platforms. My psychotherapy practice are in California, Florida, and Wisconsin. If you want to work with me there, I call that repair work, right? I call the coaching more the building work. So whatever situation you're in, hit me up and let's talk. Sure.
I love that. And for all the audience out there, really exciting conversation. And I love mindset coaches, and all of Michael's resources will be in the links and show notes. Be sure to follow him on all his socials, leave a 5-star review. And with that, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Chris, thanks so much for having me.